Welcome to the Customer First Thinking Podcast, Episode 3. My name is Stephen Shaw, the host of this podcast. And in this episode, we interview Gary Saarenvirta, the CEO of Daisy Intelligence, a cloud-based artificial intelligence computing platform helping to revolutionize retail merchandising. Businesses are drowning in data, but starving for insight, as the saying goes, and that problem is about to get worse. As society becomes increasingly connected, marketers are facing a rising tide of digital interactions. Somewhere inside that massive pool of data are the answers to questions marketers haven't even thought to ask, yet are essential to creating a better customer experience. Relief is on the way in the form of artificial intelligence. The capability to skip right to the answers without even forming the questions will be the salvation of marketers, who, until now, have had to rely on their own made-up rules or overworked data scientists. With AI, the analytical load shifts to machine learning algorithms that will help marketers reach the promised land of hyper-personalization. The first wave of commercial AI solutions has already made landfall. AI is being used today to improve audience targeting for programmatic media buying, make dynamic content and product recommendations, and drive demand-level pricing. Most of the major marketing automation and CRM vendors have already integrated AI capabilities into their platforms, like Salesforce's Einstein. Companies also have the option of outsourcing the analytical work to software-as-a-service platform providers who will help them benefit from the technology immediately. One of those SaaS providers is Toronto-based Daisy Intelligence, founded by CEO Gary Saarenvirta. The company, which specializes in retail merchandising solutions and insurance fraud protection, was recently awarded the first place prize at the 2018 Elevate AI Pitch competition in a tough field of 16 startups. The deep learning platform developed by Daisy Intelligence can ingest a massive amount of SKU-level transactional data and, through its self-learning algorithms, determine the best product price points, adjust the promotional mix to minimize cannibalization, identify optimal store locations and layout, and much more, saving merchandisers from needing to figure that all out themselves. All the retailer needs to do is turn over as much sales history as possible and let the platform perform its magic. Deep learning is very much like magic, because no one can ever say exactly how it arrives at the answers it comes up with. Known as a convolutionary neural network, the idea was first conceived by Toronto computer math wizard Geoffrey Hinton in 1986. Since that time, advancements in GPU computing has allowed deep learning to grab the pole position in the AI race, much to the excitement and sometimes dread of futurists who imagine a world where machines are smarter than humans. Remember Elon Musk's dire warning that AI would, quote-unquote, summon the demon? For the time being, AI evangelists like Gary Saarenvirta are proving that deep learning offers clear advantages over traditional approaches to data mining and analysis, both in speed and precision. And he should know, Gary ran the analytics practice at Loyalty Consulting Group for years and once led IBM's analytics and data warehousing practice areas. He's also a trained rocket scientist, having entered the workforce with an aerospace engineering degree. But today, Gary's focus is much more grounded in making AI an indispensable tool for data-driven businesses. He explains why in this deep learning interview, which started with the genesis of the company's name.
Yeah, so I wanted to name the company something that was innocuous, had no meaning, like an apple or something like that. And so I gave our ad agency an episode of Nova, which was the great math mystery, as a kind of motivation. And so the name Daisy came from the fact that you have the flower daisy. The number of petals in a daisy is a Fibonacci number.
Oh.
So the number of petals are, if you look at daisies and count them, it's a Fibonacci sequence number. And then the florets in the middle of a daisy is clockwise spirals and counterclockwise spirals. So the number of clockwise spirals are a Fibonacci number, and the counterclockwise spirals are a neighboring Fibonacci number. So, right. So and then the song Daisy was the first song sung by computer. The song
2001:
from the 1800s.
Space Odyssey.
Yes. And in 10 years, in 1964, an IBM mainframe sung that song, Daisy. Daisy, give me your answer due.
Yeah.
And it was in HAL, 2001
Yeah.
Space Odyssey. So that's the backstory to Daisy, which we love the name that came up with. So it's got a great story that aligns with our kind of math and science geeks that we are. So
it is a great story. A 15-year trajectory for your company. You started out providing analytical services primarily. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the vision was always around doing this. So I realized, having worked at Loyalty Group Air Miles, doing analytics, and was one of the first worldwide users of IBM's data mining was the buzzword back then. Right? I think the terminology has evolved faster than the technology has.
Yeah.
So we used neural nets and machine learning back in the 90s, then I worked for IBM. I ran IBM Canada's data mining practice and was one of their go-to global people for doing really high-end analytics around. My goal was always been using math and science to make companies operate smarter. That was always, my background's aerospace engineering, so I thought so much math and science used in engineering, and I was shocked at how little was in business. So I kind of accidentally walked into this career, and so a lot of experience. And I realized along the way that analytics is not a human endeavor. That businesses are so complex that sitting in front of a laptop building models and doing math is really not feasible. The typical retailer with hundreds of locations, 100,000 products, millions of customers, even if you had 1,000 analysts, you couldn't figure out what's going on. So our vision was to build this autonomous decision-making system using artificial intelligence. And so we've kind of, 2003, people thought I was a heretic when I was talking to venture funding people about autonomous decision-making and AI. And, that was 15 years ago. And so we funded it through professional services, working with one or two clients at a time in retail to kind of work out how to apply the technology in a practical setting. And we've developed, our vision is this: using autonomous decision-making for business processes that are beyond human capability. Things that are really highly mathematical, repetitive, complex.
We're going to get into that quite a bit a little later on. Okay. I do want to. You are one of the pioneers, let's put it this way, in the data mining business, as you alluded to, the work that you did at Air Miles, obviously. You mentioned IBM as well. In that arc, in that evolution, if you will, the technology is pretty primitive, even back in the late 90s with respect to analytics. Where were the key inflection points for you along the way? The moments where you saw a leap forward, either in technology or in the adoption and embrace of analytics? What were those key markers, if you will?
I think in terms of technology, I see coming out at IBM with their data mining tool, which had neural networks, so commercial setting, and they came out with parallel computing, and that was really a step up in computing power. So you could actually use this sophisticated technology. So that was kind of around the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. There was a real interest in that, and did a lot of work in banking and insurance companies back then, and telcos, and the biggest retailers who had lots of data. So that was the first time that I saw real large relational databases and the ability to want to mine that and do reporting against that. And that was kind of late 90s, 2000. There was a real increase in that business world around IBM and Oracle and Microsoft, and so as that relational database is catching on and having these massive data stores that were around back then.
It's interesting. I remember back in the early 90s going around knocking on the doors of banks trying to promote the idea of predictive modeling. They looked at you like it was voodoo science, even though companies like Reader's Digest and other direct mail catalogers had been using advanced analytics for some time for targeting purposes. So the roots had been set early, but it wasn't, as you say, until the late 1990s that it really started to germinate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the technology was invented, like in the 60s, right? And linear regression was invented in 1805, right? So the state of the math hasn't really evolved that much. And then there was a resurgence in interest in neural networks because of this computing ability. And so that brought more hype to data mining and advanced analytics. And I think it all really started with the the ability to build data warehouses and these large relational platforms.
Yeah, that was the convergence, wasn't it? Data warehouses, relational databases. But it seems to me the analytical software market was very immature in those days. Those were the early data mining tools, as you alluded to.
And they were very tool-based, right? I think that's always been the issue, that it's like the data mining technology or AI technology or statistical analysis is targeted at a technical user. And so you need to have somebody with a mathematical, statistics, engineering, kind of STEM background. And there's always been this gap between those technical people and the business practicality. And I think that gap still exists today, to this day. And that's really been the reason it hasn't really fulfilled the promise. I mean, my belief is that the information age is about making the world a smarter place and making the business operate smarter, but it hasn't really become a strategic asset yet, I believe.
So, which is a great leaping off point to a Forrester stat I came across that suggested that half of companies are still struggling with creating insights to drive decision making. In the face of this, we're surrounded by technology, as you indicated. We're living in an information society. We're all knowledge workers practically today. Why is it that analytics isn't more of an equal partner in business, or even really a central function of most businesses at this point?
Because they haven't figured out the use case. The output of a predictive model is a numerical label or a text label, like a segment, and so what do you do with that? There's no decision-making process that's been wrapped around that. So what do you do with a label? So somebody says, when the number's 2, what should I do, versus when it's 1? Like, there's no use case to say, when it's 2, alarm bells should go off, we should go crazy and call all our customers, they have to build the decisioning framework has not been built around the analytic technology, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we've developed that DAISY, which is using AI to deliver decisions. So predictive analytics and statistical analysis and deep learning even today is really looking at historical data, and it creates a label. And so you have to say, what am I going to do with that label? And that's never been adequately resolved, right? Because the technical guys go, great, I can more accurately predict and generate this number, and I can build a gains chart and rank and look how great it is. Then what do you do with that, right?
So is it, though, and I'm speaking specifically here of marketing as opposed to business decision-making in general, because the adoption of data sciences has been faster in areas of a business governed by engineering types. Marketers aren't engineers. They're not even that data oriented. They manage by assumption, by guesswork often. They don't really lean toward informed decisions around data. Is the barrier there simply not having enough data fluency or analytical comfort amongst marketers? Is that one of the barriers? Is that one of the reasons why there's no planning processes wrapped around the use of data and segments?
Yeah, I think that's one of the. I think that ultimately the business users is gap in understanding and belief. They look at it as voodoo, black art, because there's a level of complexity that gap hasn't been bridged.
They feel cowed by it.
Yeah, and I think the direct marketing world has seen the most adoption, I believe, of analytic technology. Because it's really started out in the early days at Reader's Digest and Amex with doing targeted direct marketing. And I think that world has been the only place that has seen significant adoption of analytics, and that happened over the last 20, 30 years. So that's not a new thing. And so I think, and it's gotten into this, dynamic advertising, real-time ad placement.
Programmatic advertising.
Yeah, and all of that has been, and so that's been an evolution. That's what really I see the only place that analytics has really flourished. Now, what's missing there, though, is the tie back to the P&L. That's where that if it doesn't move the needle on the P&L statement, and
how do you convince a CFO unless you can show that?
And I don't want to poo-poo. My days at Air Miles, fantastic company. I love that place. It was a formative place for me, and a lot of great people have gone through there. But I will always remember that every PowerPoint presentation was, this was 100% ROI, 500% ROI. Look, I got 200% lift over random. But then I look at the client P&L, and it wouldn't even move. So all you were doing was moving money around the building, right? And that was a really formative moment for me to say, well, how do I move the needle? Because we're seeing all this awesomeness from a statistical perspective, but it's not translating into business results. And I think that's what's been floundering for 20 years.
So is it then, the problem is that it's being used, has been used, whether it's predictive modeling or name your data mining tool, as a tactical device as opposed to something that can drive business strategy or marketing strategy? Is that the central problem here?
Well, I think it's the fact that if you imagine a company as a pie, we're only taking a little circle out of the pie, and you're assuming that all the ripple effects of what you're doing that this pie is independent. When I create incrementality in this one little sliver, it's incremental to the whole pie, but it's not. Mm-hmm. Especially in retail, you look at when you buy Coke and you go, great, look, I did a direct marketing campaign, I had double the response rate, I sold twice as much Coke this week as last week, but then you don't negate out the fact that Pepsi sales went down, juice sales went down. You don't measure cannibalization. You don't measure the forward buying. People bought 2 cases this week, but they're not going to buy a case next week. Yeah. So the marketers don't measure all of the ripple effects, because that gets very complicated. When you have 100,000 products, you have 10 million ripples this week and 10 million every week. Yeah. And so a lot of the benefit is negated, if you're not even looking at it. And predictive analytics can't look at those ripples. Yeah. And so then the business result is questionable, right? Yeah.
So just to go back to what you're saying, the inability to answer the question of why analytics hasn't yet reached the tipping point, we'll talk about more about that, is the fact that in the end, there's no proven correlation to the success of the business. There's no way to connect the dots here between the success you might have tactically in the application of data sciences to, as you say, moving the needle with the business.
Yes, I would agree with that. And that's really the challenge. And I think all the hype today is going to flounder on that same point, right? We made some exciting advances, like I think deep learning, which does image detection and, audio to text, it's been exciting, but really it's just, statistical analysis still. It's the same predictive modeling and classification, just more sophisticated technology, but there's still no business use case for, what's the economic value of image detection or text to audio to text. Like There's still supporting technologies looking for a business use case. Super amazing advances, but again, there's no great case for it. Again, it still ties back to what's happening at the P&L level, and that's what we have Daisy's focus. I've been focusing on that for the last 15 years, is moving the P&L. And I tell my customers, if I don't move the P&L, then fire me or we will quit, because there's no point doing analytics if you're not moving the P&L, right?
So, and moving the P&L really means looking for breakthrough insights as opposed to incremental insight.
Yeah, it's net income, and I think our view is in this autonomous world where the system is where we're solving problems that are beyond human capability. So we're not generating 1 or 2 insights at a time. The machine is just making the decision where people aren't good at making those decisions.
I want to come back to that point, because it does speak really to the future of marketing, that exact point, a little later on. I do want to just one other, I think, challenge I see here in Canada anyway, maybe less so in the U.S., and I'd be interested here to get certainly your perspective. Again, as one of the most advanced experienced practitioners of data science in Canada, you obviously have a point of view on this, which is that it seems to me that the analytics vendor business in Canada has been a cottage industry. There are smaller shops that never scale very large, versus the US, where there are some big players here in this space. Why do you think that is in Canada? Is it that that data volume really drives the need for advanced analytics, data volume and complexity, and that so many businesses in Canada really just don't have that size and scope that require that sort of analytical muscle?
I think the reason just happened that for whatever reason there's practitioners, and you and I know them all, great people went out and started their own entrepreneurial businesses, and then because we couldn't sell it, and I was one of them too, you couldn't sell analytics to the companies because there was no belief in the P&L impact. So then you're going, I have to pay the bills, and then you start doing things for 10, 15K a project, and that devalues the whole industry. Mm-hmm. And there was like a dozen of us in the Toronto area, and probably, I don't know so much Western and Eastern Canada, and I think that's what drove COVID. We just set price points that we could never get out of back in the day. And then because you didn't really move the P&L, it was hard to get out of that. And then the market just valued it at that. That's what I don't think it was any. I think Canada's, we have some really large companies, and there's, we're smaller than the U.S., but I mean, there's still massive volumes of data, and we can move the needle.
Banks,
I mean,
the big retailers,
I mean, we're moving the needle for our clients in the order of $1 billion a year. So I mean, there's opportunity to be what we are in the U.S. So I think in the U.S. there's a larger market, more players. Maybe they're more aggressive economically. Canadians are conservative by nature, and I think this spilled over into just the cultural differences between the two.
You need evangelists, you need proselytizers, you need people out there like yourself, articulate spokespeople for the use of analytics. And that very conversation, it would suggest that there aren't enough of those folks out there really beating the drum on it. You don't even really see that much in the way of conferences in Canada on this subject. There doesn't seem to be sort of a rallying point here. Do you see that changing over the next number of years?
I hope so. I mean, I hope to get the message out. I mean, I'm probably one of the most experienced analytical people around, but nobody knows who we are. We should be the ones out there telling the story. Like people like Richard Boir, who I have great respect for, Emma Warlow, been in the trenches for decades, and we know, and we've been doing it for 20 years, and so it's our real story that needs to be the story, not being led by academics which really don't have the practical know-how. No. And that's why I think the whole conversation is slightly missing the mark. Right? And I think that I see that we're getting a lot more attention, and hopefully we have a pulpit to share a practical, realistic message. I know our customers connect to what we have to say, so I hope that this story gets out, and that the AI doesn't flounder with the overhype that a lot of technology does, because I believe it is game changing.
I totally agree that it is game changing, and again, we're going to get into that in a big way momentarily. Let me just ask you this other question, because you've been a outsourced services provider, but you've now adopted a SaaS model as your business model. Is the direction here for businesses really to outsource their analytics function, given the shortage of I'm going to say shortage of talent, but the scarcity of talent out there? Is that a better option for companies today, is to look to a external partner that they can basically outsource all their heavy lifting to? Is that the route companies should go today?
I believe so. I think your core competency can't be everything. And so imagine you're a retailer and you hire an analytical person, and then, what's that person's career path? Right. If you want a career path for that person, you want to expose them to different things so they can learn, and who's going to manage that person and mentor them. I think the career path for analytics, if you want the best analytical people, you want them to have a career path at an company like us, or other companies like us, who would give that person a career path, expose them to multiple clients, multiple industries, and then we can bring the best of that capability to the clients. Yeah. And as a bank, you should focus on banking and know what questions to ask, know what to do with the answers, but figuring out the math and science, I don't believe that should be a core competency. I think it should all be outsourced. The challenge, big companies have so much money and they're successful, and they develop some arrogance and think they can do everything. But I really think that's the wrong path.
Well, absolutely. And unless you're a bank that has the resources that they can put into it. I mean, in case of Bank of Montreal, they've created a center of excellence around analytics. In case of Kudo, they've created a whole journey mapping, journey analytics area that powers the business. But with those exceptions, you really can't see the business case for it in a lot of companies to insource that kind of capability.
And even the big companies building these centers of excellence, great, but I still think the best talent will come from companies that focus only on doing that task, and they have the vision. The bank doesn't have an analytics vision. The bank has a bank vision, and an analytics and AI vision will come from outside. And I think to get the best, you need to partner with outside. If certainly own some of the capabilities. You should not have zero, but I think you should outsource the real innovation and the real deep technical skills from outside.
Right, that's a tough core competency otherwise. Let's talk about the talent pool in Canada. I know that Toronto is, viewed as a AI hotbed, source of innovation. Does that mean there's a larger pool of people to draw upon here, or is that a real issue for you running this business, finding the right people with the right backgrounds?
Yeah, I don't. We haven't had a challenge finding technical people. I think the world is looking for one domain, computer scientist kind of people. But I think engineers and computational scientists are the pool that we go after, because I think again, that's the world slightly missing the mark, and it's not computer science. I think it's an engineering domain. AI is a system, and when we systemize things, you get engineering thinking involved. And so having engineers who know math, computer science, they know physics. You can teach an engineer more math. It's hard to teach physics thinking or control theory to a computer scientist. So we're going after the engineering pool, and we're collaborating with the University of Toronto, and we've done hackathons with the engineering department, and so that's the kind of people we're going for. And maybe I've let the cat out of the bag here, that there's a lot of companies are hiring engineers, so we haven't had a challenge finding the technical people. Our challenge has been more on sales and marketing and client management type of roles.
Oh, that's curious. Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, I think I've heard that great sales talent. Canada has a lack of great sales talent. We've got a few good people, but we have a hard time finding that, and finding client managers who know how to do client service management, even in this software as a SaaS world. It's still hard to. You still have a people relationship, and even though we want to build 100-year relationships with our clients, there's still a role for people and talking to executives and making sure that we're delivering value. And that client account management role can't be ignored even in a SaaS world, right? So.
Well, and it's a good point, because the issue isn't creating the insight as much as it is explaining the insight, and having a business translator role in the company that actually can interpret that and define its business impact and tie it to the bottom line, as you were saying earlier. That's a difficult talent set to find.
And that's the talent set that we have the hardest challenge finding today. And I think it's an important role. We call it the customer success team, that makes sure that we're delivering value to the client, that we communicate it to the client, that they see the value we're delivering, and build a collaboration. And I think that's a human task. And I think we're good at technology, and I think we have an easier time finding technical people.
And your audience, when you're knocking on doors, are you talking to the CIO, or are you talking to the CMO? What level are you even talking to the C-suite? What level are you addressing when you try to convince them of the merits of applying AI to business problems?
Yeah, we're talking to the C-suite. So we talk to, in retail, we want to talk to the CMO, the head of merchandising. So it's the chief merchant or marketer, chief marketing officer. Different companies name their, so it's the kind of people responsible for merchandising and marketing and advertising, or the CFO or the CEO in mid-market companies. So because our goal in retail is to double the net income of retailers, or more. Double, triple. We want to turn a 1% industry into a 6% industry. That's what the game stakes for AI are. The people who care about that are the C-suite, and then our users are the retail operators, the merchandisers, category managers, marketers are the ones who use our technology on a day-to-day basis. And in insurance, same thing. We go at the C-suite, the claims people and the risk people in banking.
Well, I may be unfair in my characterization here, but I have my own fair amount of experience dealing with retailers, Sears being one of them, and they have been rather notorious laggards when it comes to embracing innovation. Is that changing because of the pressure that Amazon's putting on the retail business to innovate or die? Is that?
Well, one of our longer term client relationships have been Walmart, and they're technology innovators. I think their founding folks were really invested in technology, and that's been one of the drivers of their success. So they're visionary in that regard, and so it's been a great relationship, and we've been helping each other out. And I think in general, retailers are recognizing, I'm seeing kind of a coalescence of requirements around the globe. We have clients in 4 different geographies today, so It's very interesting to see their needs kind of coalescing, and technology is a key driver on the roadmap for for most retailers of even mid-market size, 500 million in revenue and up. I think there's a psychological threshold that happens at like $1 billion to $2 billion in revenue. Company has enough resources and they've invested in technology. So I see everyone's really looking at technology as a key enabler and a survival mechanism.
Well, it must be, because they have a double whammy. Not only do they have to deal with the omni-channel consumer who has to cross devices and channels and is expecting that experience to be pretty good, but they've also got the deluge of data that comes with it and how to possibly manage it. And they're not used to that. They're used to looking at SKU level data and trying to make merchandising decisions, not customer level data trying to make customer management decisions.
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge, I think, and that's one of the reasons I chose retail, because the volume of data and the technical complexity challenge of doing something in that space. And so that was really one of the founding premises of Daisy, is to help retail. It's something we all relate to. It's like 50% of world GDP is retail. So if we can move the needle in retail, we can move the world. That was really my going in premise.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that too, because I want to get into a bit of some use cases around that. But let's talk about AI. As you were talking about earlier, you were there in the very early years as data mining was the buzzword of that decade. And then big data comes along, and there's the buzzword of the early 2000s, and now we have AI. What phase is AI in? Is it still in a hype phase? Is it early adoption phase? Is it even a honeymoon phase? Where does it stand? There is so much being written about the subject and its application in various ways. How do you define where AI is on the maturity scale?
I think it's in the hype phase. I think the definition hasn't been clearly articulated, and I'll share our definition. So if you only analyze historical data, that's called statistical analysis. Deep learning is statistical analysis. You learn from history only. You have to have labeled training examples to train your algorithm, be it linear regression invented in 1805 or a deep learning, which is in the last 5 years. That's all of the same class of math. And the learning, if you call it learning, is mathematical labeling. So you create a label, a numerical number, or this is a dog, that's a cat. It's a label. Now, if you call that learning, then let's call that learning, but it's mathematical. It's a mathematical process that drives, and it can only learn new things at the pace that you collect new data, because it relies on historical data.
So I just want to clarify.
Sure.
So when you talk about machine learning, are you really referring to neural nets or some other technology?
Neural nets, or support vector machines, or support vector regression, all of those things, all the fancy technology. It's really all historical learning, historical data learning. And so you can only learn at the pace of time, because you can only learn a new mathematical pattern when you collect new data. So the learning happens at the pace of real time, which is not that interesting. And if statistical analysis was the panacea, it would have had its impacts in the last 2, 3, 4 decades, given the proliferation of statistical analysis tools. So I think there's a lot of hype and misunderstanding around that. I think it's a new generation of people realizing that, wow, it's the same thing I did 25 years ago. And I go, wow, this predictive modeling stuff's amazing. Look how well I can predict. And I think it's a new generation of people doing that with more computing power and more excitement. So the hype of that is like it's a whole generation going, wow, this predictive modeling stuff is really powerful.
Right? It is, until you realize it's still only a 65% accuracy rate, or whatever that figure may be. Right? It's never 100%.
Yeah, no, and it doesn't make decisions.
It's not a crystal ball.
It doesn't make decisions, and it doesn't move the needle in a P&L. So that's predictive analytics. When I talk about what we do, which is called reinforcement learning. So if you're training a new car on the road, you wouldn't let it go on the road with an empty brain and crash into things, run over people, and you train it in a simulator. So you have to build a simulation of the world, which is a model of how the world works. Now you train your car in a computer simulation. You can do 1 million hours of driving in 1 hour, so you can learn faster than the pace of time, which is very interesting. The autonomous car makes the decision on what should I do. It's not a mathematical label. There is no labeled training. You need no historical data to train a car. If you could only drive a car on the roads you've previously driven on, that would be such a waste, right? So So you have no labeled history. You have a model of the world. You can do 1 million hours of driving in 1 hour and learn how to drive. And you make decisions, turn left, turn right, push the gas, brake. So it's a decision-making autonomous. I call that AI. That's called reinforcement learning. Now, think about applying predictive analytics to the retail problem. If I have to pick products to promote, I have to pick 500 products to promote out of 100,000. The number of combinations, the combinatorial math, 100,000 choose 2,000. It's 10 to the power of 20,000. Well, that's more than the number of molecules in the universe. So there's not enough labeled data that you can create because it's the mix that matters. You can't treat Coke and cheese and bread as 3 independent things. They're all related. It's the marketing mix that drives the result. Therefore, I have to have a label for each mix. Well, if there's 10 to the power of 20,000 mixes, I don't have enough labels and I don't have enough things in the universe to create that many labels. So predictive analytics does not work in that paradigm. And so you have to use reinforcement learning. And we've created a simulation model of retail like the laws of physics. We generate 100 years of retail every day with the math and computing power. That's really been the driver of this generation of enablement, is this GPU computing from companies like NVIDIA. We're an NVIDIA partner. One of the most successful tech companies have been dramatically growing, and they're driving all the computing behind this. And so reinforcement learning for us is the ability to simulate, make autonomous decisions. Our decisions for a retailer are, here's what you should promote, here's the price, here's the inventory allocation to all your stores and distribution channels. Those are the inputs, like brake, gas pedal, steering. It's product, price, and placement and volume. Those are the inputs. Driving a retailer, 1 year of retailer is like 1 lap around a racetrack. So I use that analogy, and that's what we call it, autonomous decision making. So that's, for me, the big difference between AI and statistical analysis.
What's the business case you make to the merchandiser sitting across the table from you when you talk about this?
We deliver decisions. If you execute the decisions, we're going to grow your revenue by 3 to 5% or more. And in a 1% net margin industry, we just doubled your profit. And we've delivered that today.
And you do that by optimizing price and shelf allocation and promotion.
And the key product, the thing that's been missing, there's been a lot of companies doing price optimization and forecasting, but I haven't seen anybody do what products to pick, because I can price and forecast the wrong product. So an example would be a product like ground beef is a great product. Consumers shop because they have a use case in mind. And if they see ground beef promoted, they go, oh, I'm going to make an Italian dinner. And nobody consumes just raw ground beef except my crazy uncle. They have to buy associated products. So you buy pasta, tomato sauce, produce. If you're making hamburgers, you buy hamburger buns and condiments. And contrast that to a case of water. The use case for water is just buy the water. So if you promote a product with a use case, your transaction will be larger than if you only promote products with no use case. Then you have to net out the ripple effects. Because I bought ground beef to make hamburgers, hot dog sales go down. In the halo, hamburger buns I bought because I'm making hamburgers, I bought less hot dog buns. So even the halo has a cannibalization effect. And then there's forward buying. I bought a 2-week supply, and probably not in fresh and perishables. You would buy a 2-week supply of pop or coffee or paper towels when it's on sale, and you're stealing from the future. So you have to net out all of those effects, and that's the kind of theory of retail, as well as the spatial geography. I'm not going to drive by 10 competitors to go to your store to get 10-cent discount on carrots. But if you're giving gold bars away for free, I'll drive across the world to get my free gold bar. So product, geography, all the common sense things that retailers know. Lower prices result in more sales, better promotional elasticity, TV ad, flyer, front page of the flyer is better than no ad. These are all the common sense things which we've assembled into a theory of retail, like the laws of physics that we simulate.
So this sounds phenomenal, obviously, but I'm still struggling a little bit with that merchandiser sitting across the table from me, hearing all of this and saying, yes, but what do I do with this information? Like, how do I apply it? How does it change my planning process? What do I do differently as a result of this information you're giving me?
So every week a merchant has to go, what am I putting in let's say, just use the flyer example. It could be a website or a mobile app, but just a stock flyer. I have to put I'm a merchant. I'm in the dairy category. I have 3 ads I have to fill and decide what product am I putting in those ads. Well, Daisy says put milk, cheese, and yogurt. Put milk on the front page, cheese and yogurt on the inside page. We say, and here's the price you should charge. So we give the merchant, here's what you should do. And the merchant could say, well, I don't really like that. Or I have a vendor willing to give me money on this other brand of yogurt, so I'm going to swap out the brand. Or I'd say there's not enough supply in the market, so I'll swap it out. And then Daisy will say, well, here's the next best 10 products you could pick. So we help them make the decision. In fact, we can make the decision for them and do it autonomously. In promotional planning, there's people in the loop. In regular assortment and regular price, there's already too many data points for people to look at. One very large retailer asked that we responded to an RFP. They were looking to do 90 billion forecasts 3 times a day. 90 billion.
90 billion.
And so there's no human in the loop on that. And that was because they have, several million products and they have thousands of locations. So the cross product of product times location was 90 billion. And they wanted to know 3 times a day what the demand for those store product combinations will be. And so we responded with 30 other vendors. And the other vendors' questions were, how many users of the system? And the client went, it's 90 billion data points. There's no human in this system. So it's already, some of the world is already thinking of autonomous, right? And it's because these problems are beyond human capability. And that's the class of problems that I think AI should focus on. Now, it's not going to replace people because there's lots of things that people can do. Businesses are complex. In retail, you got to talk to the vendors, do other things.
So it's interesting because there's a liberating effect to this, because if you can take that complexity away from the marketer or the merchandiser, they can actually focus on other things where human judgment and intuition actually might be important or play a role. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. We think it's improving people's working lives. I like the word liberating because that's one of our founding principles, is that yes, we'll make the world smarter and more efficient profitably, and we'll take away human drudgery out of work by doing some of these tasks that are so complicated and
defeat data tyranny, I call it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what our belief is. And human beings can do things like, what are the images, the creative, talk to vendors, service customers, figure out the last minute exceptions. There's a hurricane wiped out the raspberry supply and I got to figure out something else to do. There's a lot of things that people can do that machines are terrible at.
Yeah. And marketing really has a role to play going forward in humanizing the corporation and learning to create a brand voice that resonates more closely with customers. But that also, the whole question of complexity raises its head here, because with the omnichannel consumer now traversing multiple devices and channels, as I said earlier, it introduces a level of complexity they've never seen before in terms of how do you manage those interactions. So you've been talking about price optimization and merchandising, but there's the other side to this, which is the actual interactions that are occurring day to day, and the real-time requirement to provide information on demand that is rule-driven today, and rule-driven by some database marketer or CRM person sitting in a room. That's going to be beyond those companies, which is, I guess, why a lot of the CRM vendors are beginning to embrace AI tools like Salesforce with Einstein, for example.
Yeah, and we do marketing mix as well across channels. So optimizing how much should you do on which channel. And I think all of that is the beyond human complexity stuff that should be done. And I think that's where AI can play a role. And we shouldn't be spending time having AI try to get into the domain of human beings. I think we should, AI should be a tool to make humanity better. Having AI do creative things and write songs and books, interesting technical challenge, cool. But I mean, we need to leave a place and space for what we're good at. I think this hype about singularity, I think, is completely overblown. But I think in the creative, ambiguous thinking world, human beings are great at that. Yeah. And I think that's the marriage between the two sides. So.
Yeah. So beyond the use case that you've mentioned in retail, which you can easily see, where else is AI a candidate for sort of immediate business impact?
I think it's all of those problems that are that have huge volume of decisions required every day, that are highly complex, highly mathematical, large volumes of data. And so we, in insurance, we're doing fraud detection and predictive underwriting. So you get 1 million claims coming in an insurance company every day, identifying what's fraudulent, or bank transactions, where's money laundering going on, having somebody apply for a mortgage, doing the credit rating on that, and you have that happen thousands of times a day. Mm-hmm. So I think these high volume decision-making processes is where we see it making a difference. So we see in manufacturing, predictive maintenance, which tools should you maintain, how do you optimize the flow through a production plant, how do you make decisions on pricing and forecasting and whether I should pay this claim or process this transaction. All of these areas, I think, are these beyond human capability things where we can have an immediate impact and where a lot of cost is spent today, and there's huge opportunities. Again, just moving the needle 1 or 2% in those high volume areas has a massive financial impact. And we always go after the largest cost line in every industry. If you look at those large cost lines, that's where the opportunities are.
And what about insofar as the customer experience goes? Because if you look at, for example, Chinese society today is largely a mobile first society. They live on their phones, they buy on their phones, they pay on their phones, they look for information on their phones, all in real time. Is AI going to govern that real-time experience for customers going forward? Is that going to be the platform, because it's frankly the only way to be able to handle that sort of real-time interaction?
I think planning doesn't happen real time. Planning happens, I think, before that. Real time would be the execution of the plan in real time. So I think what we're talking about, planning a flyer or planning mobile is the same thing. You decide, because you have to merchandise it. If you don't have the product available at that moment, you have to somehow anticipate what are my millions of customers going to want 2 weeks from now and be ready to supply that demand. So the planning happens earlier. And then in real time, you can execute interaction with customers. The key thing that we look at is we're analyzing 100% of the transactions done by companies in store, online, mobile, every channel. So we're listening to 100% of what your customers are saying. It's the ultimate customer experience, and then executing across all your omni-channel and giving the customers what they want, which is having the products available that they're interested in, having prices that customers find compelling, and having the stock there when they want to buy that product. And that's how you service customers in retail. Right?
Do you also use AI to identify micro segments within the base that you might start thinking about differently? In other words, I guess where I'm going with that is, as opposed to thinking of AI as a tool for handling individual interactions, and perhaps that's the answer, hyper-personalization, but is there also room strategically to use AI to really sort out, with this mass of data that you're describing, particular customers that share very common characteristics across a number of different types of behavior?
Yeah, I'm a believer in segments, and so in our math, in our simulation, we decompose the business into customer segments and store segments, because your best customers, the frequent customers, the data around those customers is very different than your infrequent customers. So all the math and science works better when you have homogeneous pools of data. And so hyper-personalization, going one-to-one, I'm not sure that there's an economic value proposition there. I think having segments of, instead of having maybe 10 segments, you could have hundreds or thousands of segments in a 1 million customer database. I believe in that. So having thousands of segments and servicing the segment, because it's hard to merchandise one customer. You merchandise an entire business. So in retail, if we keep using the retail example, the same would apply everywhere.
I was thinking more along the lines of what you were describing earlier, where there's that wave effect, where somebody buys one product and then it suggests 3, 4, 5, 6 other products they should be picking up in real time. They could be checking their mobile phone. Those recommendations made to them instantaneously based on that purchase that just occurred.
Yeah, I think for sure. But I think there's also a free halo that you don't need to promote the halo products, because if a customer's buying a turkey at your store, most people don't cherry pick a turkey. Some people do, but you don't have to promote the pumpkin pie and the aluminum foil and the other fixings, because that's going to happen anyways. So what you want to do is promote. You might want to remind them.
Well, you just don't want them getting
in
their car and driving across the street and buying somewhere else.
No. For certainly, you would say, hey, the tin foil's in aisle 3, but you don't have to necessarily discount it. You can just remind them that here's where all the other things are that you should pick up. So for sure, I believe in maximizing the opportunities for the retailer. And at the same time, that's good customer service, because I think people, you can view it negatively, say, oh, we're manipulating the consumer. No, we're not. The customer's there for that use case, and if you can make it easy and service them and let them know availability and how to find it, that's good customer service. If customers consolidate their spend in your store, you've done them a favor, because they were going to buy those things anyways.
But so just fast forward to the future, though, is if we start to embrace conversational marketing as the same way you're seeing sort of chatbots embraced by customer service, isn't that going to be AI powered as we move toward real-time conversational interfaces, voice interfaces?
Yeah, there's
Alexa,
a lot of hype around that. I'm not sure. We're a long way from semantic language understanding. Some of the examples, like the Google making a hair appointment, that's so far from reality that, so we can do audio to text more accurately, like than in the past, but semantic language understanding is a long way away. And frankly, some consumers sure might want to interact with conversational AI, but we don't want to. Why not interact with a person? Hire a person and interact with a person. That's not a bad thing. I think the race to replace humanity in every corner, I think there's priorities. We should focus on the priorities. And if we want to replace ourselves at the end of the day and sit on the couch at home and do nothing, I don't know.
Well, that's of course the specter of AI, as we're all going to be roboticized out of jobs, right?
That's a long way away. I don't believe the singularity will ever happen. How do you, just an example, the language things, how do you train a computer to communicate? So just think of all the lifelong learning about the appropriateness of language. When you were a kid and you swore, your parents got mad at you, or you told a joke, nobody laughed, you got embarrassed. Communication is a social interaction. How do you train that into computers, right? And I think if you collected every conversation ever had, I don't think the computer could figure out what.
So we're not going to see a Westworld anytime soon in
I don't believe
our
so.
lives.
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, that's a good thing, actually. So we talked at the very beginning about what's been the barrier to the acceptance of analytics as a core competency in most organizations. And is there a risk with AI that it will actually create greater distance between marketers or business decision makers and the data, because that basically those decisions are getting handed off to a machine? Is there a risk there that will reduce data fluency as a result of automating data analysis?
I think that's a good point. It could happen. I think customers are always asking, so what's inside the black box? And we try to be as transparent as possible, but it's so complex that we couldn't say. I could say here's the factors that were considered in making this trade-off, but I don't know exactly why, because we did 100 trillion computations to come up with the answer. So certainly there's some element of trust. I think the human being has to know that there's common sense being applied, and I think having that common sense and oversight will always be part of it. I think that's the role of the person, even in an autonomous system, is that there's some oversight and continuous measurement that it's working properly and generating financial impact. But certainly, I think there are certain problems that human beings will continue to apply analytics to. It's not like the machines will take over all analysis and humans will do none. So I think it's just a focusing analysis where people can handle it and do it. I think, and there are lots of problems that that the machine doesn't have to do. So
you're saying there's still a role for predictive analytics and
Yeah.
sister disciplines.
Yeah, certain problems. There's certain problems. If a problem is purely data driven, that's a predictive analytics role, or where there's very little ripple effect in the decision. So if I'm buying tires, there's not a big ripple effect with tire purchase. It happens once every 5 years, so there's not a frequency issue. That's a customer acquisition challenge. That's a targeting challenge. That's a perfect predictive modeling opportunity. Or image detection. There's no theory of images really. It's you create this completely data-driven, deep learning, convolutional neural net and doing medical imaging. That's a data-driven problem. So there's predictive analytics being done there with deep learning. And so there's certain problems where predictive analytics will play a role, and certain problems where it's this reinforcement learning approach will play a role. I think the vast majority of problems are reinforcement learning, complex business problems. And I think humans still need to be analytical. We still need to train them. Somebody needs to build these systems. So, at the end of the day, I don't think it changes the requirements for people at all.
No, I worry about a chasm being formed between the sort of the technical people in an organization and the non-technical people.
Well, it's already there.
Whereas the few that already is there, it's going to widen even further, which is this chasm that creates different languages and they can't relate to each other, and you need this interpretive.
But if we focus the AI on delivering business results, then it forces the technical people to speak business. And I think that's been the lack of adoption. So if we bring economics to the AI world, that's what has to happen to make it to proliferate. And if that doesn't happen, then it's going to go into the valley of despair or whatever the next technology
disillusionment,
the valley of disillusionment. So I think we're headed there very quickly with all this hype.
Well, and so that brings me to the question of what do you see as the future of AI over the next number of years? How do you see it evolving and maturing and flourishing, to use the word you used earlier?
I think the conversation will change to this reinforcement learning and approach, an autonomous approach that we've talked about. There's some topics that need to be talked about, like fault tolerant. So if now we run a machine is running autonomously, how do you know that the process is ran properly? Like in a fighter jet or a Mars lander, there's there's fault tolerant software that says, okay, is it all running properly? And if the computers fail, then there's a backup plan, and that has to be in place. When the Mars lander is landing at the last minute, there's no human joystick. There's two or three computers going, pull the chute now. 2 say yes, 1 says no. The 3 computers got to figure it out and make the right decision. And now, so if I order 1 million tons of bananas, whoops, it should have been 100,000. That's not like I'm going to kill anybody, but it could kill the business. Yeah. And so it has to be fault tolerant, and there has to be a system to control it. So I think you're going to hear more about systems and control theory being applied to an AI system. It's not just an algorithm which is dominating the conversation. So I think we'll broaden the conversation to what's the economic value, how do we control these systems, how do we make them fault tolerant, and I think those are the conversations that need to start happening. And I think the concept of labeled training data, the sea hunt for data, is misguided. It sells a lot of hardware, which is why the hardware vendors invented big data, because hardware sales should be following the curve of Moore's law, right? But they had to go collect all this data. We can keep propping up the hardware sales, and so the marketers at the hardware companies are like, thank God we got past that one. We were even in this Moore's law world. We were still able to sell just as much gear because we convinced everyone to put sensors on their car and collect your driving data and collect social media data. Thank God, we convinced everyone to do that. But I think that.
So you're saying IoT won't be the accelerant for AI?
I believe it's going to be reinforcement learning and decision making. Like we said, you don't need to have any labeled training data to drive a car. You create your own labels. So there is data required. We certainly use the historical data, but it's not this sea hunt for data sources. That's not the driver of AI. It's the decision making profitable decisions or smart decisions that impact a system. And I think the economic benefits will be the driver of AI. Otherwise, it'll just this hype cycle will come into play when it's not generating any economic results.
One final question. I'd love to sit here and talk to you for another hour. Maybe we should do a part 2. is if you're sitting across from a company for the first time, and I mentioned this earlier, trying to make the business case, when they ask you the question, well, how do I even start? Where do I start with this? How do I, start to use AI and build out a use case internally that I can merchandise? What's your answer to that? What's the on ramp for AI in a company that hasn't been down this path before?
Well, I would say, I take a budget or a revenue line and say, is 1% of that an interesting number? So that's the first thing. So that's, if it's $100 million cost budget, and I say, if I move the needle 1%, that generates $1 million of value. Okay, that's interesting, because I can now go spend a couple $100,000 or $500,000, and there's a business case there. So start there with a big problem. Then look at business processes where people struggle, where there's lots of data, super complicated trade-offs, that you make millions of decisions every week. So we know that 90% of the things that happen, there's been no decision made at all. It's just old rule-based systems, cost plus or random what's happening. So focus on that, and then figure out what to do with the math. How is the math going to help? Like, if you're going to create a predictive model or a label, what am I going to do with the answer? And how does that tie back to the financial result? I think those are the key things that you need to think about. And there's still a lot of data management issues that haven't been addressed. So people have forgotten about data warehousing. They're talking about data lakes and new terminology. We still need to manage the core data, because that's what's used to drive AI. If you're not managing your core like master data, what your product hierarchies are, definitions, historical promotions in retail, you're managing who your customers are, who the providers are in healthcare, managing that data. It's the data that drives the quality of AI, and so we can't forget about managing our internal. I
was going to ask you that earlier about data quality and how much of an obstacle that was. An obstacle 30 years ago. Is it still an obstacle today?
It still is, and to me, it's the proof point that nobody's really doing any strategic analytics, because we haven't solved that problem yet. So almost every retailer we work with, the first thing we do is we've got to do tons of data management work to get the data to the place that the because that means to me that nobody's actually doing anything really strategic with it, because they haven't solved the data problems yet, because that's very hard.
Wow.
Like a product hierarchy, having products organized in departments, sub-department, categories, subcategory, and then all these UPC codes that should be the same price, because it's blueberry, strawberry, yogurt, vanilla yogurt, they're all the same price. They're all different UPC codes, but they should be considered as one group. That data entity doesn't exist in the vast majority of retailers. Ad blocks, the fact that when we do cereal, we do Cheerios, Honey Nut, all of these different things go into an ad. Those are multiple price item groups in an ad. Price item groups and ad groups don't exist in the vast majority of retailers, and we see them now starting to build these things, because they realize to do analytics or any analysis at all, you want to analyze how did that ad do or how did that item do. Well, you have to have that data entity created. And so none of that stuff existed in retailers. I could tell you very large retailers only very, very recently, in the last year or two, starting to actually think about those things, which to me is proof that analytics hasn't even scratched the surface of possibilities, because most of the things we're working on are completely irrelevant if we're not dealing with the core data assets.
So there's a significant on-ramp just getting past that challenge before you can even start down this path.
Yeah, and there's solutions. AI can help do those things to group your products together. That's where we can create labels. That's where traditional statistical analysis and text mining comes in. Look at, red wine and white wine. What's the different words, and should they be in the same group, or they should be in wine and then red and white? We can use text mining and traditional statistical analysis to help build product hierarchies and groupings and ontologies and lots of different businesses. So.
Well, Gary, I have to say this has been absolutely fascinating hour. So, and just one last thing, you recently picked up an award that got you some attention in the press. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, three things happened this year. We were named a Gartner Cool Vendor earlier this year, and one of three worldwide vendors for AI in retail, which is a a Gartner recognition for companies kind of precursor to the Gartner Magic Quadrant, with tech vendors as kind of a holy grail, one of the big industry analysts. So we were named that. That was very cool. In Silicon Valley, about a month ago, we were named the AI Startup of the Year, which was a hotly contested category of 100 entrants. And there's NASA and X Prize were the judges, so that was very exciting. And then in Toronto, the Elevate AI, which looks like it's coming to be Canada's big tech week in Toronto anyways, and we were announced as the winner of the pitch competition and got a $5 million term sheet from Espresso Capital, who's one of our great partners, and so it's all exciting that I've been at this for 25 years to have my vision starting to gain some legs. At times I thought I was maybe out of my mind and doing the wrong thing. So it's very exciting to have people start to buy into the vision. And I always say it takes a community to build a company, and certainly we have a community of support rallying around.
Well, it can't happen to a nicer guy. So
thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Steve. Thank you.
That concludes our interview with Gary Saarenvirta. It's clear that we're now past the hype stage of AI. As it gains widespread acceptance and use, AI will become an enabler of the data economy. The lesson for marketers: start looking at AI now as a fast and practical way to cope with the complexity of analyzing customer data. Remember, you just need to think of the challenges you need AI to solve, not how to come up with the answers. You can find past episodes of this podcast on customerfirstthinking.ca, where you also find blogs, white papers, infographics, and more on the transformation of marketing. In closing, a big shout out to Cam Campbell, Brent Morris, and Justin Eacock for their contribution in making this podcast happen. Until next time, thanks for listening.